They called it gratitude, but it was a leash. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the observation deck of the human Ark ship Vanguard of Inquiry. Below the Aurora court glittered a filigree station spun from light and solidified legal precedent. It was humanity's first true embassy to the galaxy's elder races, a place of dialogue, not dominance. But dialogue required a common language, and the Cathar hegemony spoke only in the tongue of obligation. Their hulking biomechanized ships hung in the system's outer darkness, a silent, brooding jury. The stakes were a fledgling human colony on a world named Viridian's 7 million souls who had traded one cradle for another, only to find a new kind of chain waiting. A public inquiry had been invoked, a star court of last resort, and humanity's moral line was about to be drawn in the void. The law of the elder races was not about justice. It was about stability. A young girl on Viridian, clutching a worn synth bear, watched as the Cathar tithe proctor scanned her family's meager harvest. Her father stood with his hands clenched, his jaw a line of white fury. The proctor, a towering insectoid being in polished obsidian armor, made a soft, chittering sound. Your gratitude is measured and found wanting. It broadcast in flat universal grammar. The hegemony gifted you this world's stability. 1/10 of your energy, your food, your thought is our due. The collar around the father's neck glowed a faint, painful amber. It was the price of a debt they had never agreed to owe. Rostova turned from the viewport as her tactical officer Jorik approached. His face was a mask of controlled anger. Commander, the Cathar have filed their formal claim. They cite the doctrine of proximity grace. They're arguing Viridian falls under the protective umbra of an ancient hegemony beacon. He scoffed, the sound sharp in the quiet of the deck. A dead rock that hasn't squawked a signal in 10,000 years. It doesn't need to be functional. Jorik, she replied, her voice low and even. It only needs to be theirs. The core of the problem was there, simple and brutal. The hegemony did not conquer with armies. They conquered with receipts. They arrived at worlds and presented a bill for services never requested. Gravitational stability, solar flare, mitigation, protection from pirates that likely answered to them in the first place. Their weapon was an unpayable generational debt. It was a form of conquest so insidious, the galaxy's oldest courts had yet to find a statute against it. An empire built on a fraudulent invoice was still an empire. The ship mind has finished its analysis of their claim, Jorik continued, gesturing to the air, where a shimmering form was coalescing. The witness of soul. The vessel's integrated intelligence appeared as a column of silver light, its voice 1,000 harmonious tones. Commander Rostova, the AI, chimed its synthesized voice, devoid of emotion, but full of data. The Cathar claim rests on 1,600 precedents, of which 1,400 were settled in their favor. The legal framework of the Aurora Court prioritizes established claims over emergent rights. Statistically, our chance of outright victory is 11.3%. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the distant Cathar fleet. Then we will not seek an outright victory, she said. We will seek a mirror. Jorik and the AI remained silent, waiting. They want to argue debt, will open their books, will force this inquiry to audit every transaction, every tithe, every collar they've ever issued. She finally looked at her officer, her eyes hard as neutronium. We're not here to win a legal point. We are here to teach a lesson in accounting. The cost of a lesson is paid by the teacher, but its value is owned by the student. Their legal specialist, Lynn, met them in the briefing room. The space was stark, dominated by a holotable that currently displayed the Cathar claim as a web of glowing, venomous-looking threads. Lynn, small and precise in her movements, traced one of the threads with a stylus. Their argument is elegant in its arrogance, she stated, not as a compliment. They claim their mere presence in a sector elevates its safety. They are owed tribute for an ambient service. To argue against it is to argue that a star should not be thanked for its light. A star doesn't demand you wear a shock collar if your thanks are insufficient, Jorik grumbled. That is the point we must pivot on, Rostova affirmed. The Aurora Court is old. It recognizes abstract principles. The Cathar have wrapped their extortion in the language of cosmic harmony. Our job is to unwrap it live in front of the entire galactic quorum. The witness of Sol pulsed softly. This strategy is a high-risk social gambit, Commander. It relies on inducing a state of moral revulsion in a quorum of beings with wildly divergent moral frameworks. The probability of success is difficult to quantify. Quantify this. Witness. Rostova countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper. What is the value of a single child growing up without a collar around her neck? The AI paused for 1.7 seconds. The value is infinite, it replied, and therefore it is a variable that breaks the equation. An infinite variable changes the nature of the math itself. The first step was to accept the inquiry. It was a formality, but a crucial one. By accepting humanity was agreeing to be bound by the court's verdict, no matter how catastrophic. Rostova transmitted the confirmation herself. The signal was a simple burst of data, a digital handshake across the void. The Cathar fleet responded with a slow, ceremonial pulse of their running lights, a gesture of cold, reptilian confidence. They believed the game was already won. The trap was set, the prey had walked in, and the court was merely the stage for the sacrifice. On Viridian, a schoolteacher tried to explain the concept of interstellar law to a class of children. She used blocks to represent ships and glowing beads to represent worlds. The nice ship is asking the big ship to see its homework. She simplified her own gratitude collar, a dull metallic band against her skin. They want to make sure their math is fair. A boy in the front row whose father worked the tithed fields raised his hand. But what if the big ship doesn't want to show its math? He asked. The teacher's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Then the nice ship has to be very, very clever. Cleverness is the last weapon of the outnumbered. They've responded. Lynn announced, her eyes fixed on a cascade of alien script flowing down her console. They've accepted our counter-motion to make the inquiry a public record, fully transparent and audited. Jorik frowned. That was too easy. They should have fought us, tried to bury it in subcommittees and legal cant. They believe their position is unassailable, Rostova reasoned. They see our demand for transparency not as a threat, but as an opportunity. They want to make an example of us. They want the galaxy to watch them put humanity in its place. She looked at the AI. Witness begin a deep dive into their public ledgers. I want every tithe they've ever collected, every world they've ever graced. Cross-reference it with stellar energy outputs, trade volumes, population growth. I want to know the true cost of their gratitude. The AI's light column brightened. A search of that magnitude will require significant computational resources. I will need to divert power from tactical simulations. The only battle we're fighting is in that courtroom, Rostova said. Make it so. A ledger is a history written in numbers. The days leading up to the inquiry were a blur of legal strategy and data analysis. Rostova and her team worked in shifts, sleeping in nutrient cots and living on stimulants. The witness of Sol became a silent humming god in their machine, its processors churning through millennia of Cathar history. It found patterns of exploitation that were staggering in their scale. Worlds rich in resources were tithed more heavily. Populations with a cultural predisposition towards cooperation were squeezed until they fractured. It was a slow, systemic strangulation of 1,000 civilizations, all perfectly legal under the ancient, indifferent laws of the court. Their cruelty was not a bug. It was the core feature of their system. "We found something," Lynn said, her voice tight with excitement, one cycle shift. She projected a star chart into the center of the room. It showed the Viridian system and several light-years away, the dead Cathar beacon. The beacon. According to their own records, it was decommissioned due to a critical energy cascade failure. They logged it as a total loss. She zoomed in on the technical specifications. Its power source was a contained singularity. When it failed, it didn't just go dark. It would have created a gravimetric shear, a hyperdimensional wound in space-time. Yorick leaned forward. So it wasn't a passive protector. It was a hazard. More than that, Lynn said, her finger tracing a projected timeline. The failure occurred 973 years before the human colony ship even arrived on Viridian. The hegemony knew the beacon was not just inert, but dangerous. Yet they never logged it as a navigational hazard. They left it there, a silent time bomb. Rostova saw the path forward. They didn't gift Viridian stability. They exposed it to risk. A risk created by their own negligence. A debt of gratitude is cancelled by an act of malice. This was their first major weapon. The Cathar were not benevolent guardians. They were slum lords who had left a ticking bomb in the basement and were now demanding rent. It was a powerful argument, one that would resonate with the Quorum's more technically minded species. But Rostova knew it wasn't enough. It would turn the case into a technical squabble, a battle of expert witnesses and sensor logs. It wouldn't expose the moral bankruptcy at the heart of the hegemony. She needed more. The truth had to be sharper than a simple fact. Before the inquiry, Rostova made a private visit to the Viridian refugee enclave aboard the Aurora Court. The colonists had been allowed a small delegation, a handful of families, to serve as witnesses. She walked through the sterile corridors that had been decorated with hand-drawn pictures of green fields and blue skies. She saw the father from the harvest, his collar removed by court order pending the verdict. He was teaching his daughter how to play a string game, his hands moving with a gentleness that defied the anger she had seen in the recording. He looked up as she approached, his eyes full of a desperate, fragile hope. "Commander," he said, his voice rough, "they say you speak for us." "I speak for humanity," Rostova corrected softly. "That includes you, always." The girl looked at her, her gaze unnervingly direct. "Will you make them stop?" Rostova knelt down, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "We are going to make them show their math," she said, echoing the schoolteacher's words. "And when they do, everyone will see that it doesn't add up. Hope is the most powerful fuel in the universe." The Hall of Inquiry was a cathedral of impossibly vast scale. Beings of 100 different biologies floated and sat in their designated pods, a silent, shimmering gallery of galactic power. The air hummed with translation fields and life support systems tuned to 1,000 different atmospheres. At the center, on 2 raised platforms, stood the human delegation and the Cathar Emissary. The emissary, named Cathar Vex, was a giant of its species, its carapace polished to a mirror sheen, its multiple limbs held in a posture of serene arrogance. The court, adjudicator, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline shell, pulsed with a cool blue light. "Let the inquiry commence," its voice echoed in every mind simultaneously. "The hegemony of Cathar claims tithe right over the human world of Viridian. Humanity of soul contests this claim. Emissary Cathar Vex, you may present your case." Cathar Vex moved forward its steps, heavy and deliberate. "Honored Quorum, our claim is simple. It is a matter of record. For millennia, the Cathar hegemony has provided order and stability to this quadrant. Our beacons, our fleets, our very presence have created a zone of peace in which new life such as these humans may flourish." It gestured dismissively towards Rostova. "They settled in the benevolent shadow of our ancient works. We ask only for a token of gratitude, a tithe, a small acknowledgement of the grace they have received. The law is patient with those who speak its language." Lynn took the floor for humanity. She did not grandstand. She presented data. With calm, chilling precision, she laid out the evidence of the beacon's failure. She showed the hegemony's own internal logs, the ones the witness had exhumed from their public archives. She displayed the gravimetric shear simulations. The hegemony did not provide a benevolent shadow, she stated, her voice ringing with clarity. They created a clear and present danger to navigation and planetary stability. They failed to report this danger in violation of Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the Aurora Compact. They did not offer grace. They demonstrated negligence. A ripple of interest went through the quorum. This was unexpected. The Cathar's confident narrative was being dismantled with their own records. Cathar Vex seemed unperturbed. It waited for Lynn to finish, then stepped forward again. Negligence is a matter of perspective. It chittered smoothly. An ancient device fails. Such things happen. The minor gravimetric distortions are well within tolerable limits for any reasonably constructed vessel or colony. The true service was not the beacon's function, but its existence. It marked the territory as hegemony space. It deterred pirates, slavers, and lesser threats. This passive protection is the service for which we claim our due. This was their fallback position. They were prepared for the negligence argument. Rostova had expected it. Now came the real test. A prepared defense is a map of the enemy's fears, Commander Yorick whispered into their private comm channel. The quorum is wavering. The passive protection argument is a classic hegemony gambit. It's impossible to disprove. Stay the course, Rostova murmured back, her eyes locked on Cathar Vex. Lynn took a steadying breath. Emissary, you speak of gratitude. Let us explore the nature of this gratitude you demand. Can you describe to the quorum the mechanism by which the tithe is collected and compliance is enforced? Cathar Vex tilted its massive head. A simple matter. A portion of all energy and material production is transferred to our collectors. Compliance is encouraged through the issuance of gratitude collars to all adult members of the beneficiary population. It spoke as if describing a mundane agricultural process. The collars provide a mild corrective stimulus should an individual's gratitude waver. Define waver, Lynn pressed. Failure to meet tithe quotas. Seditious speech. Thoughts of rebellion. The emissary's voice was flat. The collars monitor biosignatures and neurological patterns. They ensure social harmony. The truth spoken plainly is its own best weapon. There it was. Out in the open. Not a mild stimulus, but a tool of torture. Not social harmony, but thought control. The chamber was silent. Even for the ancient and often callous races of the quorum, the casual admission of neurological monitoring was a step too far for many. Some species considered the mind to be the only truly private domain. The hegemony's entire system was predicated on violating it. So to be clear, Lynn said, her voice like ice, the Cathar hegemony claims a debt for a passive, unrequested service from a derelict piece of their own technology, and enforces this debt by placing devices on the population that monitor their thoughts and inflict pain if those thoughts are deemed ungrateful. We provide stability. Cathar Vex repeated, its tone unchanged. Stability requires order. Order requires compliance. The logic is inescapable. It is the logic of a cage, Lynn countered. A cage is stable. It is orderly. It is also a prison. Their logic was a circle, and at its center was a collar. Rostova knew this was the moral victory, but the legal victory was still out of reach. The court did not rule on morality. It ruled on precedent. And the precedent for non-interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign power was ironclad. As long as the tithe was legally framed as a debt, the enforcement mechanism was considered an internal matter. She needed to break the concept of the debt itself. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Witness, she subvocalized. Is it ready? The package is compiled and authenticated. Commander, the AI's voice resonated in her inner ear. Ready for transmission on your mark. Emissary Rostova said, taking the floor herself. Her voice was calm, but it commanded the attention of the entire hall. You have spoken of logic. Let us engage in it. A debt requires two parties, a debtor and a creditor. It also requires an agreement, an accepted transfer of value. You claim you provided value to the people of Viridian. Can you show this quorum the receipt? Cathar Vex made a sound like stones grinding together, a Cathar chuckle. The receipt is the colony itself. Its existence, its survival is the proof of our service. Oh, that is not a receipt. That is a tautology, Rostova replied, taking a step forward. You argue that because they live, they owe you. I ask for proof of a specific transaction. What precisely did the hegemony give to the colonists that they accepted? This was the linchpin. The hegemony's entire legal empire was built on the idea of an assumed, unrequested service. No one had ever successfully challenged its core premise in the Aurora court. Cathar Vex seemed to swell with confidence, sensing a final crushing victory. The evidence of our service is not found in dusty ledgers human. It is written in the very biology of your people. The hall went utterly still. This was new. A gasp went through the human delegation. Explain, the adjudicator pulsed. Our beacon, even in its diminished state, emitted a subtle field of harmonizing frequencies. Cathar Vex announced, its voice booming with triumph. For centuries it bathed the world of Viridian in this field. When your colonists arrived, their biology crude and malleable adapted. Our sensors confirm it. A specific protein sequence in their cellular structure shifted to resonate with the field. They carry the mark of our grace within their very genes. It turned to face the entire quorum. They accepted our gift into their bodies. The biological adaptation is the receipt. The debt is absolute. It was a brilliant, horrifying move. A legal checkmate. They had turned the colonists' own bodies into evidence against them. The burden of proof was no longer on the Cathar to show they had given a gift. It was on the humans to prove they hadn't accepted it, an impossible task, when the acceptance was written in their DNA. The air in the human command pod went cold. Yorick swore a single vicious syllable. Lynn stared in stunned silence. The ultimate prison is one's own body. Rostova stood frozen for a long moment. She felt the weight of 7 million lives, the stare of the galactic quorum. She felt the smug alien certainty of Cathar Vex. Anger, hot and pure, threatened to boil over. She could order Jorek to power weapons. She could condemn the hegemony and walk out an act of defiance that would doom Viridian and make humanity an outcast. But she looked at the memory of the child's face, the father's gentle hands. She thought of a schoolteacher explaining math with blocks, and she chose a different path. She let the anger cool, let it harden into something else, something cold and sharp and clear, principled reckoning. Witness, she whispered, her lips barely moving. Forget calculating victory. Start calculating truth. Run the new variable. If their biological receipt is the standard, apply that standard to them. Search their own genetic archives, their own tithe records. Find me a mirror. A new equation requires a new kind of math. The AI did not respond for several seconds. The silence on the inquiry floor was absolute. Cathar Vex stood motionless, basking in its perceived triumph. The adjudicator waited. Rostova held her ground. Then the witness of soul spoke into her mind. Analysis complete, Commander. I have found an inconsistency, a profound one. Their own ledgers contradict their central claim. The mirror is ready. Rostova's expression shifted. The flicker of despair was gone, replaced by an arctic calm. She met Cathar Vex's multifaceted eyes across the hall. The emissary was still radiating triumph, blind to the true nature of the trap that was about to close. It had built its case on a lie written in biology. It did not realize that humanity's greatest ally was an intelligence that could read any language, including the language of genes, and check it against the one truth that mattered: the ledger. Justice is a function of memory, and our memory is perfect. Rostova let the silence hang in the vast chamber for a beat longer. She let the Cathar emissary savor a victory that had already turned to ash in its grasp. Then she addressed the adjudicator, her voice resonating with a clarity that cut through the thick anticipation. Adjudicator, we do not dispute the emissary's claim that a biological change occurred. We dispute its legal meaning. The emissary has proposed a new and fascinating standard for galactic law, that an unintentional biological adaptation constitutes a binding multi-generational contract. A biological receipt, as he calls it. She paused, turning her head to survey the shimmering pods of the quorum. Humanity, as a newcomer to this court, is willing to learn. We will accept this new standard, on one condition. A lie can build an empire, but it cannot hold it. The adjudicator pulsed a soft, inquiring violet. State your condition, Commander Rostova. Our condition is that this standard be applied universally and retroactively, as all true principles of law must be. If a biological marker is a receipt, then it is a receipt for all parties for all time. She turned her gaze back to Cathar Vex. The emissary stood perfectly still, but Rostova could almost feel the dawning confusion, the first tremor in its unshakable arrogance. We ask the court to apply the Cathar standard to the Cathar hegemony itself. The game had not changed. The board had been reversed. Cathar Vex let out a sharp chitter of contempt. A meaningless semantic game. The hegemony has no such biological debts. We are a creditor race, a source of stability. Are you? Rostova's voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of an impending avalanche. Witness of Soul, project your findings. Public Ledger Exhibit 1. The Cathar hegemony's energy tithe payments to the Cygnian Ascendancy for sector-wide gravimetric stability, dated 16 millennia ago. A vast holographic screen materialized above the central floor. It showed ancient Cathar records, their own script meticulously translated. It detailed centuries of payments to a race so old they were now just a myth. It seems, Rostova continued, that the Cathar have, in their long history, been on the other side of this exact transaction. They paid for an ambient service they received from a more powerful neighbor. Strange, is it not? They understood the role of a debtor perfectly well back then. The foundation of their argument began to crack. Cathar Vex shifted its weight, a sign of agitation. Ancient history is irrelevant. The Cygnian Ascendancy is long gone. Those were agreements between sovereign powers, not the uplifting of a primitive species. Then let us look at biology as you suggested, Rostova said, her voice hardening. Witness Display Exhibit 2. Cross-reference the Cathar genome publicly available on the Galactic Archive with the Cygnian genetic markers recovered from their deep space artifacts. Another image appeared beside the first. A double helix of Cathar DNA, and alongside it, a fragment of an alien code. A specific protein sequence in the Cathar genome flashed highlighted in red. It was a perfect match for a sequence in the Cygnian fragment. A murmur, a wave of 1,000 different sounds of surprise washed through the quorum. The emissary's own weapon had been turned against it. According to your own standard, Emissary Rostova pressed her words like hammer blows. This is not merely a fragment of genetic drift. This is a receipt, a biological acknowledgement of a service rendered. Your species carries the mark of the Cygnian Ascendancy within every cell of your bodies. A debt you have apparently forgotten to mention. This is an outrage, a genetic parasite, a relic of a bygone era. Cathar Vex roared, its composure finally shattering. Rostova raised an eyebrow. A parasite. That is fascinating. Because in your own internal logs, the ones you submitted as evidence against Viridian, you call this exact same phenomenon a mark of grace. She took another step forward. So tell us, Emissary. Tell the quorum. When a species leaves its mark on your DNA, is it a parasitic infection? But when you leave your mark on ours, it is a holy blessing for which we must pay in perpetuity. Hypocrisy, when illuminated, burns brighter than any star. The hall was silent. The Cathar emissary was trapped. Its own logic, its own arrogant, brilliant final move had created a legal paradox that was now strangling it. It could not deny the genetic link without invalidating the science it had used to claim Viridian. It could not admit its own argument because it would expose its entire imperial history as a lie. The Cathar did not give grace. They paid their debts to the strong and created fraudulent debts for the weak. They had two sets of books. The truth does not require two ledgers. On Viridian, in a makeshift public square, 7 million colonists watched the broadcast on a shimmering projection screen. The father held his daughter's hand, his knuckles white. When the Cathar genetic code flashed on the screen, a collective gasp went through the crowd. They didn't understand the complex legal arguments, but they understood the image. They understood the look on the Cathar emissary's face. It was the look of a bully who had just been punched in the mouth. For the first time in a generation, the faint, oppressive hum of the gratitude callers seemed to lessen, replaced by a rising murmur of pure, unadulterated hope. Justice witnessed by the victim is the purest form of vindication. The adjudicator's light shifted to a stark, analytical white. Emissary Cathar Vex, Commander Rostova has presented a logical inconsistency in your claim. Your legal standard, when applied to your own history, produces a contradiction. How do you reconcile this? Cathar Vex stood rigid, its massive form radiating fury. It knew it had lost. The legal argument was in ruins. All it had left was the threat of force, but to do so in the hall of the Aurora Court would be an act of war against the entire Galactic Compact. It was checkmated. The human's logic is a trick, it spat the words dripping with venom. A perversion of our benevolent intentions. Your intentions are not on trial here today, Rostova said calmly. Your methods are. And your method has been found to be a self-serving lie. She turned back to the adjudicator. We move for dismissal of the hegemony's claim. We also move for censure for bringing a fraudulent claim before this court. And finally, her voice dropped, filled with a cold, clear fire. We move for restitution. The scales of justice do not just balance, they can be inverted. Restitution, the adjudicator pulsed. The Cathar hegemony knowingly and willfully maintained a navigational hazard in the Viridian system, a hazard of their own making. The human colony ship navigated this hazard at great risk and energy expenditure. We have the logs. We have the calculations. Lynn stepped forward, uploading the data instantly. Furthermore, for the last 20 years, the hegemony has extorted resources from the Viridian colony under a false pretense. A debt that never existed. We are not just asking for the collars to be removed. We are presenting an invoice. This was the mirror justice maneuver in its final form. Not just defense, but reflection. Not just victory, but a reckoning. The witness of soul filled the holographic space with a meticulously detailed accounting of every watt of energy, every gram of refined metal, every liter of water the Cathar had taken from Viridian. Then it added interest compounded over 20 years, calculated at the standard rate set by the court itself. Finally, it added a fine for the endangerment caused by the derelict beacon. A receipt is a weapon that cuts both ways. The total was staggering. It was enough to fund a small fleet. Cathar Vex trembled with rage. You would dare. Present a bill to us, to the hegemony. You taught us the method, Rostova replied simply. We are merely grateful students. The adjudicator's light glowed a brilliant, decisive gold. It had processed the arguments, the evidence, and the precedents. The silence in the hall was so complete it felt like a physical pressure. The court has reached a verdict, its voice announced, devoid of emotion, but resonant with absolute authority. On the matter of the tithe claim against the world of Viridian, the claim is found to be based on a legal standard that the claimant themselves do not universally recognize. It is therefore invalid. The claim is dismissed. A wave of relief so powerful, it was almost audible, swept through the human delegation. On Viridian, a cheer erupted that shook the very ground. On the matter of censure, the adjudicator continued. The hegemony is found to have brought a claim based on contradictory internal principles. This is a grave misuse of the court's time and authority. The hegemony is hereby censured. The golden light flickered, and a mark of censure, a symbol of shame, was instantly appended to the Cathar hegemony's official record on the public galactic ledger. A reputation once tarnished is hard to polish. Finally, on the matter of restitution, the adjudicator concluded. The human claim of negligence and extortion is found to be valid. The invoice presented is accurate and calculated according to established court statutes. The Cathar hegemony is ordered to make full restitution to the Viridian colony effective immediately. The Aurora court will enforce the transfer. The Cathar emissary let out a choked, grating sound of disbelief. It had come to the court to legitimize a conquest and was leaving with a crippling debt and public humiliation. Its empire of paper-thin obligation had been undone by a species that still remembered how to read the fine print. The pen is mightier than the sword, but the ledger is mightier than both. Rostova watched as Cathar Vex turned and stormed from the platform, without another word, its heavy steps echoing its defeat. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction, but it was a loyad with a cold awareness of the future. Yorick came to her side. We did it, Commander. We actually did it. Yes, we did, she said, her eyes on the dimming holographic screens. But we've made an enemy today. One that will not forget this. This was the first cost of their victory. The Cathars would no longer see humanity as a primitive upstart. They would see them as a mortal threat, and they would not make the mistake of challenging them with laws again. Lynn joined them, her face pale but resolute. There's another cost, Commander, she said quietly, holding up a data slate. The witness. To find the final proof, the Cygnian genetic marker in their private archives, it had to bypass several layers of hegemony data security. The intrusion was elegant, untraceable, but it was still an illegal breach of a sovereign data network under court law. Rostova nodded slowly. This was the second cost. In their pursuit of a higher justice, they had bent their own rules. They had fought a liar by becoming spies. The victory was not clean. It was earned, and it left a mark. Log it, she ordered. In our internal records only, a classified cost of victory report. We won by the ledger, and we will live by it, even when it holds us accountable. A victory without cost is a victory without meaning. The adjudicator's final words echoed through the hall. This court hereby sets a new precedent. The doctrine of proximity grace is amended. Any claim for ambient services must be accompanied by a formal, acknowledged treaty. The use of coercive biological or neurological enforcement mechanisms on non-signatory populations is hereby declared illegal. This precedent is locked into the Aurora Compact. Let the public ledger be updated. It was done. They hadn't just saved a colony. They had changed galactic law. They had broken the hegemony's primary weapon not just for humanity, but for every emerging race that might have become their next victim. The gratitude collars all across Cathar space were now illegal. The best victories are the ones that free more than just yourself. As the delegations began to disperse, Rostova looked up at the great vaulted ceiling of the Hall of Inquiry. She saw the central spire where the court's enforcement mechanisms were housed. The mirror array's vast energy converters that handled interstellar resource transfers began to glow with an intense silver light. They were executing the judgment, pulling the tithed resources from the hegemony's accounts, and returning them with interest to the small defiant world of Viridian. The light was a silent, beautiful testament to their victory, a beacon of pure, cold, mathematical justice. She watched until the last watt of energy was transferred, and the arrays slowly dimmed their work complete. We came here to argue for our lives, but we leave having taught a lesson. They believed law was a weapon to be wielded. We have shown them it is a mirror to be held up. They will not like the reflection they see the image of a bully and a fraud, but it is a truth they can no longer deny. The galaxy has seen their math, and it does not add up. Our victory was not in our strength or our anger, but in our memory. We remembered the numbers. The numbers always count. The ledger is the law.